morning. I wanted to ask you both, structurally, I think maybe for folks who are thinking about coming to New Hampshire, or folks who are in New Hampshire, it's an interesting thing for folks in New Hampshire to discuss anyway, and folks outside New Hampshire. If you can comment on a couple things. First off, the town meeting form of government and how the Senate Bill 2 has sort of changed that. What the traditional thing is now, it's not all town meetings in some towns. And also after that, some areas like Franklin and others where they have tax caps, and how that has helped their bottom lines.
Well, we're the group that basically spearheaded Senate Bill 2. Actually, the correct name is, up here, state laws are revised statutes annotated. There's been a variety of iterations of how they've codified state laws in the past. There's been public statutes, revised statutes, public laws, going back any amount of time, 150, 200 years that they've been codifying laws. Well, since 1955 in the state, they've been revised statutes annotated, or RSAs, as people refer to them for short. And Senate Bill 2, as legislation is introduced in the legislature, they're either House bills or Senate bills. And in 1994 or 95, the second bill on the Senate calendar, SB2, is what's commonly known as Senate Bill 2, but the actual designation is RSA 40:13, which is the official referenda form of town meeting. My town adopted it. The first year we were able to. It's what's known here as enabling legislation. In the state constitution, all power in the state of New Hampshire is vested in the legislature. And we don't have home rule here. You might think you do, but you don't. You're allowed to do things because the legislature has passed a law that enables your town to adopt, to do certain things. And the official referenda form of town meeting is one of them. We still have here what you would call the traditional town meeting. I always get a chuckle out of these political types who come here from heaven knows where, and they're holding town meetings where they've handpicked 50 people to sit in the audience and ask prearranged questions. Town meeting doesn't work like that at all. I know in Mass, they have what they call a representative town meeting, where your neighborhood elects a representative to go to town meeting for you, because most towns are too big to have everybody show up in town at town meeting. But New Hampshire still has the traditional type town meeting that we have had going back into the 1700s, late 1600s. No longer is it required that you be a male who owns property over the age of 21, as it was when my town first started in 1729. Now it's anyone on the checklist can go, and everyone is able to stand and speak their piece. Everyone is an expert on everything, and they will tell you that from the floor. But they're entitled to speak their mind, and sometimes you get some really interesting stuff comes from the folks. We're into town meeting time right now. If you follow your local government at all, you know that your selectmen and your school boards have been since about October in the process of putting budgets together to take to town meeting. There will be a budget public hearing that will have to be held, whether or not you're SB2 or not. The second Tuesday in March is considered to be town meeting day in New Hampshire. It's one of the few days where the legislature is not in session. And that's because most of the legislators are either moderators, selectmen, or school board members, or some other checklist supervisor or something else. So they frankly don't have the time to go to Concord that day. So they've been preparing budgets. Budget committees have been meeting. If you live in an SB2 community that has a March annual election. You will be holding your budget public hearing sometime within the next week. That's the deadline by the law. If you're in a traditional town, as we have a number that still are, follow the traditional town meeting format, there's about another 3 or 4 weeks before you have that, before petitioned articles are due or actual regular warrant articles, and they have the hearing. The regular town meeting, as I said, anyone can speak. They present the budget. You vote on budgetary issues. Shall we buy a new police car? Should we buy that fire engine the fire chief wants? And do we really want to pay for all the bells and whistles on it, or do we think we can do it cheaper? And what does the finance committee or budget committee think? That's traditional. That's what town meeting is. There's zoning questions that you vote on election day, and some towns they talk about them, some don't. SB2, what that did is, if you've gone to a regular town meeting, and Selectman Keen here sort of alluded to it, that you don't do things by secret ballot. It's they give you yellow cards, and that's, you go through the checklist, and if you're on the checklist, they give you a yellow card. That's a voter card, and the moderator will go, all those in favor of the motion to buy a fire engine, raise your voter card, and everybody holds up their yellow voter cards. That may be fine for fire engines, but when you're voting on teachers' contracts, police union contracts, hiring extra policemen or firemen, if you're in the opposition, it is amazing how much grief you can endure in a community. You kids go to school the day after the school meeting, and they're getting grief from the teacher because you stood up and spoke against the teacher's raise. Or they'll send somebody forward and they'll tell the kids, go home and tell them that the teacher will go away if they don't vote for the teacher contract. If you stand up and speak against the police department, don't be surprised if suddenly you're being pulled over for motor vehicle checks. This happens in towns. So what SB2 did was, they said that no longer will you be voting where people can look and see how you vote. You can do secret ballots, but you know, after about the third one, it's the will of the audience is like, oh, another one. Because you have to stop and count these things, and they have to appoint counters and the whole bit. So what SB2 says is, just like you go into the voting booth and you vote to pick who you want the selectmen, who you want for road agent, if you still elect road agents, or checklist supervisors, you get to vote on all the warrant articles the same way. So no one knows if you're for or against the teacher's contract. No one knows if you're for or against buying the police cruiser, because you mark it on a ballot in the privacy of the voting booth, and you turn it in, and they get counted later. That's the primary thing of what Senate Bill 2 is. Vermont has operated on a system like this for a long time. So what happens is you have a deliberative session, which is like the traditional town meeting, but you don't vote on anything. So after everybody's through, it's just announced it moves on to the ballot unless you've amended it and changed it. And about a month later, you go in and you vote. And at the end of the day, when all the ballots are counted, you find out if stuff passed or it failed. People will say that no one goes to deliberative session, and to some degree that's true, but you know, the day you have a real hot button project, they're going to show up. And